Good morning, everybody. It's good to be with you. Appreciate everybody taking time out of their busy calendars to join what I think will be a very good discussion today. I'm really excited to be welcoming a friend and a guest to this webinar. Edison Alvarez, he's the Director of Information Security Governance at Beck & Dickinson, is going to be joining me for what I believe is going to be a really good discussion on a topic that is very relevant in today's age, as cyber threats and the growth of IoT is rapidly expanding. Momentarily, you should see the slides pop up. I'm going to wait to see those. Thank you very much. If you please go to the next slide. This morning, you'll have to tolerate our asking the slides to go to the, we need someone else running the slides, so please tolerate our asking for the slides to be advanced. But as I said, I'm really excited to welcome Edison. Edison is a great champion of good cybersecurity. He works for one of the largest global medical device manufacturers, Beck & Dickinson. They make a variety of medical devices. Over 70,000 employees, and as Edison told me earlier this week, approximately 148 connected products that have software enabled on them. So Edison, I welcome you. Thank you so much for joining the discussion today.
Hey, Mike, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. So just to kind of set the table for our discussion, if we can go to the next slide, please. Connectivity today, as everybody knows, is going up. As connectivity increases, the complexity of securing that technology and that connectivity increases dramatically. When you think about organizations like Edison and the challenges of trying to secure over 148 different products, the complexity of doing that across a large organization is incredibly complex. And with that increase of connectivity and complexity, of course, the threat landscape is expanding. And the risk for companies is growing larger and larger as they onboard IoT devices, as they introduce more connectivity into their business to gain greater insights and greater data. But those threats are very real, and they need to be addressed and handled. Today, Edison and I are going to be talking about the process of trying to standardize and harmonize security practices across a large organization. And BD has undergone this journey over the last several years, and Edison has really been on the front line of driving that project. So we're gonna be talking about that. And I want to emphasize, we're talking about healthcare today. Healthcare is one of the most targeted industries, as everybody knows, due to the value of patient records and the information that can be gleaned when a patient record is accessed. But the lessons that we talk about today and the journey that BD has gone through can also be applicable in any organization that it has growing cyber threats and is looking to standardize and harmonize practices across their organization. And so, I believe that this should be, can be shared and applied to any industry. So what we're going to do, just to kind of give an outline of our discussion today, we're going to start by talking about the real threats in healthcare. We're going to highlight just a couple different attacks that have happened, just to demonstrate the reality of the challenges of securing healthcare. Then we're going to dive into Edison and BD's journey, and we're going to probe and learn about the process that they undertook to begin the process of standardizing their security processes. One of the security practices that they decided to standardize was public key infrastructure, and of course that's as the Vice President of IoT Security at DigiCert, that's where DigiCert comes in. And we'll be talking about public key infrastructure briefly and why it is one of the solutions that makes a lot of sense to be standardized. And we'll talk about the strengths and some of the benefits of harmonizing PKI across an organization. Next slide, please. And the next slide. So Edison, I know you guys lived through Wannacry and you were part of this, but for those unfamiliar, the Wannacry attack of 2017 was a very disruptive attack globally. Within a day, this ransomware spread to over 200,000 computers, 70,000 devices throughout 150 different countries. One of the organizations that was hit most hard by this ransomware attack was the National Health Service in Europe. And it was the first known time when patients were actually turned away from receiving needed care because systems were down due to a cyber attack. The attack targeted devices and computers running Windows operating system. They had released a patch recently, previous to the attack, and encouraged people to download it. But it primarily spread rapidly because of the amount of devices that had not been updated. Again, in healthcare, this was a very disruptive event. Edison, maybe I can pause and just reflect, just ask you guys, I know you lived through this attack. Maybe you can tell us from your experience how this impacted you guys.
Mike, so yeah, to your point, I think this was one of the largest, attacks focused on healthcare. I think when you look at the number of devices that just BD has, right, the effort that it is to actually, bring those patches into our devices, validate them, because obviously we're a regulated medical device, so you have to do some level of validation, then release that to the products and actually install them on all the products that are connected. It's extremely difficult, right? And so although the patch was available 2 months prior, right? Just the coordination, the amount of effort that has to go through there to actually get to all the devices is just really difficult for us to do as a medical device manufacturer. It just stems, the importance of good cybersecurity, good practices like patch management on the devices, and moving that forward. But it was extremely difficult. Obviously, we were all impacted, but I think that helped drive a lot of the programs internally too. Again, something as fundamental as patch management on medical devices really came up front to our board.
Yeah, sure. I know you guys didn't have a ton of time to get those patches applied, and when you have a global organization like yours, sometimes it takes a little while to deploy those. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely. I think to your earlier slide, right, increasing the connectivity of devices gives you the ability to push those patches down a lot faster, obviously, because now you don't have to, send a service engineer out to install that. Right. But with that, you now have a more complex network, and obviously now you have a higher risk on your devices, right? So nothing comes without a cost, right? But those are the trade-offs, and obviously connectivity is important. And it far outweighs, the challenges that we just have to figure out as far as reducing that risk. Right? Yeah,
absolutely. If we can go to the next slide. As I said, medical devices, healthcare in general has been an industry under attack. A quick Google search on connected medical devices and hacks will show and give you plenty of good nighttime reading. Their medical devices have been under attack, like infusion pump systems within HDOs, cardiac devices, neurostimulators, diabetes. I'm a type 1 diabetic. There are plenty of connected insulin pumps that have been hacked. It's a target-rich environment and industry, and because of that, a lot of attention in healthcare has been given to improving the way security is handled. And the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, which is the regulatory body in the United States, has been proactive. We're starting to see more regulatory bodies globally starting to stand up and put in place stronger regulation. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But I just want to get off this point by saying it's an industry under attack, and cyber needs to be taken serious. And organizations like BD getting out ahead of it and doing the right things are setting themselves up for success. Edison, if we could go to the next slide, I'd love now to dive in to the journey you guys went. Large medical device manufacturer. I know you've been with the team for quite some time, but maybe you can walk us through this journey. and I'm going to probe with questions as we go.
Please do, please do. No, so as Mike started out, right, we have actually it's almost 184 devices now that are software enabled. About 89, 90 of them manage PHI, right? But the way BD is broken down is by medical segments, right? So you have life sciences, medical, and interventional. That's how our organization is structured. Within each one of those, we have obviously focus, right? So in life sciences, you see things like biosciences, diagnostic systems, pre-analytical systems. So these are all the devices that are typically in the basement of a hospital performing diagnosis. And then in medical, you have more patient care devices. As we go through that, each one of our organizations in those segments have what we call business units, right? So again, biosciences, diagnostic systems, and then you have the products that report under that. So if you look at BD's portfolio, really, we're from the front to the end, right? So we're at the discovery, diagnostics, medication management, and therapy management, and with that comes a lot of complexity too. You have systems that could be as large as lab automation systems, taking up a whole floor, right, of a laboratory, to a handheld device that has remote connectivity to test for flu. And so with that, as many of you may understand, right, different software languages, different software development life cycles and practices, release cycles are very different and broad. And so for us, it's been definitely a challenge, right, to help standardize this and push this forward internally in our organization. And so there's a lot of discussion, a lot of collaboration that needs to happen.
Yeah, complexity is the right term.
Yes, very complex.
Yeah.
Yep. Could we go to the next slide, please? Keep clicking through. There you go. So as I explained, right, so there's multiple business units. Started talking about the different types of devices, and what that really translates to, right, are system limitations, hardware and system requirements that need to be considered. We look at the complexity to our customers, right? How we communicate, things like software updates or patches, as we talked before, and it really does drive higher risk. Again, to your slide before, Mike, I loved it, right? Because it's higher connectivity, higher complexity, higher risk, and those things are so true. And with all that in the back end, there are increased costs, right? Security is an expense, right? Obviously, it could be a less of an expense as you begin to look at security by design, as opposed to trying to do it, reactively when you have issues. And so that's actually one of the things that we'll talk through today. Really is, standardizing those solutions, because that will help drive the costs down. And with that, obviously, it's not as complex to manage. I'm not going to say it's not complex, because it will always be complex. But hey, that's just the nature of it, right? So those are some of the product security challenges that we've encountered as BD.
Tell me, a common challenge we have, knowing that you have as many business units and products that you do, what's your strategy for getting security-minded resources on the team? Are you guys centralized and they consult with you, or do you guys deploy security resources across and embed them on all of your teams that have software products?
So it's kind of both, right? And so there's definitely key areas where you can't have everybody being an expert at every different business unit or product team, right? There's definitely certain things that you want to centralize, build that subject matter expertise and those services to the organization, but you really do need then the continuity, if you will, with the R&D teams, with those software developers and those product managers and marketing teams even, right, to make sure that security is being planned for. So actually, this is I think a pretty good slide, representing all the different things that really drive centralization of solutions, right? So when you talk about, do you have a centralized team and do you have experts within the product teams? And I said both is, when you're dealing with key activities, let's say like a risk assessment, right? And standardizing your design requirements, you need a centralized team for that. So you have a consistent approach. When you look at penetration testing, right? That's a very niche kind of area where technical expertise is not, everywhere, right? Those are really talented individuals, but they're hard to come by. to say you're going to have one tester for every product, and they're not going to be as busy either, right? And other things like incident response. So how do we react to things like, the Wannacry, right? What's the communication to our customers? That's a lot of coordination. So you need that to be centralized. But the outputs of all of that, require us to really drive down those product security gaps. And so again, now you're talking about not a centralized team, but someone who's working closely with the R&D organization to, prioritize those gaps that were found and close those out. And so it's leveraging both, I think, areas smartly, right, and really planning ahead with the organization to do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So if we look at this representation here, selecting a vendor partnership to help drive consistency with the teams, but also simplifying that almost portfolio of solutions, and again driving that financial impact down is very important. So this is really been a challenge at BD like any other organization, but we feel like this is definitely the right way to go. If we can go to the next slide.
Hey, Edison, before you jump into this, I didn't say it at the top. If people have questions, we would love to respond as best we can throughout the presentation. So if you have questions, please feel free. I know there's a chat window. Those will be passed to Edison and I, and we'll do our best to respond. We'll also be doing some Q&A towards the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So this is a little bit more detailed, right, of our journey and our product security approach, right? So we talked a little bit about the centralization of these teams, right, for risk assessments, incident response, but we also have dedicated architecture teams. So these are individuals that are really looking to standardize, right, the solutions that are being offered to address common issues across all the different products, right? So we look at things as simple as anti-malware or multi-factor authentication, but including PKI, right, and code signing. Those are things that can be applicable to very different teams. So making sure that we have that security architecture team centralized is very important. We started hinting at partnerships, right? It's funny, we look at don't look for a vendor, but look for a partner. When we look at the number of solutions out there for all of these common issues for security, you could quickly end up having over 200 vendors to try to provide a security stack, even in medical devices. So you're looking at that, it's too difficult to manage, and in some cases, you almost start creating conflict, if you will, between resources of a product when you're trying to run different solutions. So really looking for a partner that can address many security issues at once with one type of solution. We'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, throughout the presentation. But then also looking at organizational requirements and limitations. There's not enough resources, right? There's not enough security professionals out there to address everything. So it's not just a throwing resources out. And then also internally looking at leveraging our procurement and purchasing power to drive again the costs down of these solutions is very important. And Mike, were you going to say something?
So to that last point, talk to me about the benefit financially. I mean, how has this impacted the cost of security for you guys?
Oh, it's significantly, right? So when you look at it, volume pricing, right? But also when you work with a partner at that stage, right? You're looking, just not for the short gain, but the long-term relationship as well, right? And so how can you start showing the benefits of bringing in solutions like DigiCert across all of the portfolio? It also helps. I call them hidden costs, right? We talked about this in the past, Mike, where it's simple things just as managing a vendor, managing the renewal cycles, and looking at statements of work, and just all that background work that gets done gets minimized as well, right? And so when you look at that, it really drives efficiencies when you're working with a partner like that. And I think just long term, when we enter these relationships, our requirements, if you will, for the vendor, drive changes within their products, which then drive improvements in ours, right? So I was jokingly calling that the circle of life
Yeah.
right? Where it's like, hey, we have this very unique situation with this product team, and DigiCert was, jumped right at there. You guys even traveled out to one of our business units and worked with the R&D teams, right? And that helped drive changes, back at DigiCert as well, to say, hey, this is the challenges that the organizations are having. Let's go back to the whiteboard, if you will, and figure out a solution that'll work for them. And that actually helps all of industry really at the end. And so I again, jokingly call it the circle of life, but it is so very true.
No, yeah. I mean, I remember sitting at dinner with you and Rob Suarez, and you guys talking about the importance of a partner relationship instead of a vendor. And I remember asking kind of what that looked like. And looking at several years past, I mean, you guys have been so influential on a handful of our product decisions, as well as you guys have requested things and features that you need. And I think the value of a partnership really is that collaboration and beneficial to both, and it's benefited us as well. We've got a handful of questions coming in from the audience. I think some of them are good, Edison, so I'm gonna sling them at you. One of the questions here is, how do you manage the process of executing patch system updates in the different HDO environments? We know that those are complex, and oftentimes they have different tolerance for risk. So maybe talk about the process for how you guys approach that.
So it's an excellent question, right? I think when you look at that, I'm going to keep going back to your slide, Mike, because it really was very eye-opening when you say, in order to do this effectively, you do need connectivity, right? And so you got to be able to push these patches down on the devices, but knowing that adds extra complexity and extra risk. I think one of the biggest things that we identified internally was right-sizing the validation for patches for our medical devices. In the past, when we looked at any changes to a medical device, our R&D teams, even our internal quality teams, thought we had to go through an extensive software validation process that's more geared towards changes in the actual software, right? And so right-sizing that patch validation internally is extremely important. But it's also planning, right? So like say, this is another thing that we have to now account for as a medical device organization, resource for, and have activities for. So it's not something that you necessarily just do, right? With the resources that you have today, or with the plans that you have today, you really have to create a very strong patch management system internally, and then getting them out. Like I said, I think it is through connectivity. Right now, the only other options that we really use and leverage are obviously our service organization to go and to the actual device, the sneaker net, right? And actually install them. And even when you have that, is also, what other plans can you do to say, hey, can we have a more routine service visit, not just at the preventive maintenance cycles, but even just for patch management and software updates, right? So it's a little bit more higher touch, a little bit more higher cost, but those are some of the ways that you can address patches for medical devices.
Yeah. Do you guys communicate with the HDOs when they're purchasing about the frequency of those updates? Do you guys set any expectation or do things around that?
Yeah, I think even our customers are holding us more accountable to that as well, right? In our information security agreements, we started looking at communication more proactively through our internet site, right? And so we actually make notifications available for our customers. Every month we have communications that are sent out, so we communicate that to them.
That's awesome. All right, another question, and this gets into a tough topic, especially, a tough topic globally, but legacy devices.
Oh man.
We know there was a recent MedTech event on legacy, and that I spoke at. And I remember just saying, if legacy was easy, we would not be having conferences solely dedicated to trying to solve the challenge of legacy. It's challenging, and the FDA's approached it with their post-market guidance, but it really is challenging. The question from the audience is, what are some of the challenges implementing security to legacy devices in the field? And maybe if you care to share any approaches that you guys are taking to address the concern of legacy.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conference, Mike.
Yeah, it is,
right? We've had some conversations about this. I think the IMDRF just released a new model to how to manage end of life as well. There's a tidbit there of end of support, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges with medical devices has been, and I'm sorry to go off a little bit on a tangent here, but back when in my previous life, having a product that was out in the field for 10 plus years was something to be really proud of, right? Because you actually designed a device that was, withstanding the time and was providing, patient care even after that. Those devices are the ones that are now turning into the highest risk with legacy, right? Because now you can't update them, right? There's hardware and system limitations, right? And so I think understanding or rethinking really the life cycle of a product even after it's released is one of the biggest areas where we should be focusing on, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not so cool to have a medical device out there for 10 years, right? Because it creates this challenge. So how do we look at it from an organization standpoint? I also think it's also collaboration with our customers, right? And transparency is, so when we can't or we can no longer provide system updates, we have to make that communication, and that's where that IMDRF slide or lifecycle management is really helpful, because there is a end of support, right? And so as a medical device organization, we are responsible, right, for providing those patches or providing those security updates. But there is a time where if we're retiring that device and the customer chooses to continue to run it, where now there's a clear handoff of responsibility, where we've done our due diligence, we've now communicated not just an end of life, but an end of support date. If you so wish to continue to use those devices, you can, but now the ownership really of applying those security patches or updates is now on the customer.
Yeah, great. We'll address one more question, and then maybe jump back into the slides here. I think I'm understanding this question correctly. It's talking about connected devices in the field and ways to identify when a compromise has occurred, and any best practices. And maybe I'll take a stab, and then Edison, you can follow up, because we handle this and address this commonly. Compromises. So I would start by saying there's no silver bullet in cybersecurity. Cybersecurity has to be a layered approach where you're doing multiple things to protect a device, and one of those is intrusion detection and being able to detect and identify when a device has been compromised. The next, regarding public key infrastructure and certificates, revocation is a very important strategy, and having a certificate management and a device management platform that allows you to identify at the device level where a certificate is sitting and have the capability to be able to revoke that certificate is very important. IoT Device Manager at DigiCert, we have those capabilities. We have the ability to, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but to embed an identity within a device, which gives you the traceability to be able to identify that device. And then once that intrusion is detected, you have transparency to your device and have the ability to revoke and to control the credentials on that device, and then renew or push new credentials out. And so it's really a layered approach. You need to be doing multiple things to make sure that that device is secure. And then you need the right management systems that give you the ability to have that power to revoke and then control the device. Edison, anything you'd add on top of that?
The only thing I think I can add, Mike, is that this is why, from an internal perspective, when we look at things like PKI, right, these are things that we don't want to reinvent or even want to manage long term on our own. And so the importance of choosing the right vendor like DigiCert to help manage these kind of things, it's clear, right, for all the points you just made.
Thank you. All right, let's jump back into the slides. Actually, Edison, before we go, I have one other question. You had mentioned it before, and I think it's important because we've actually had earlier this week, yesterday, I had a manufacturer ask about training, about enablement, and we are setting up to do that. And I know we've worked with you guys to help enable and train. You talked about when we went out to the team out in Europe, and we helped do some training and architecture review. But talk about how you enable. So once you get a security solution up, you have 148 different business units or products that need to understand how to leverage and do that. What's your process for educating and enabling your team to take advantage of the solutions you put in place?
Yeah, so we like to call it the roadshow, right, for training, and leveraging, our monthly calls, like Center of Excellence calls we have at BD for cybersecurity, right, and making sure that all of the teams are aware of it. It goes back to the centralization and the teams within the product teams as well, right? That hub and spoke model. Make sure that once we actually do centralize or make a common solution, to have those teams push that message down to the R&D organizations, to every product team. And shamelessly leveraging guys like you to help with that enablement piece of it, right? We're not a training organization in some cases, right? So being able to rely on our vendors to help train our R&D organizations on these solutions is critical. I think that the biggest successes that we've seen with common solutions have been because of the roadshows, right? Is the vendor willing to train our organization right with us, and then feedback any issues that they're having, again, driving that constant application or software improvements for even those solutions to address security gaps.
Yeah, thank you. I think you guys have done an outstanding job of that. All right, let's jump back. Fundamentals of device security. What do you have to say here, Edison?
This is security by design, guys, right?
Yeah.
So we've got this little motto internally, right? It's don't think about it afterwards. We all know that those just drive to more complex, and more costly changes into a product, right? So we have security by design at BD. We have high-level design requirements to address many of these things that you see here. So when we talk about never trust authenticated connections, right? What are the requirements that you can build to address that? Never run unsigned code or unsigned data, and encrypt sensitive data. Heck, you encrypt all data, right? If you can. It just never hurts, right? And I've seen where products start out, very simple, not managing PHI, right, or PII, to, if you really ask the product managers, they have a roadmap for that device, in 18 months or 24 months to start handling PHI and PII, right? So you got to go back and say, you may not be doing it today, but you need to start encrypting your data now, because your roadmap is that. So this is, fundamentals of device security speak very closely to what we're doing at BD.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think if we go to the next slide and then advance one more, FDA probably agrees with you on this, Edison. I mentioned earlier that the Food and Drug Administration has actually done a lot to drive better cyber practices in the manufacturing of medical devices, and I think hats off to them. You've touched on some points of collaboration with the HDOs. The FDA has really been driving the importance of collaboration between HDOs, but also security researchers. You guys have people who are constantly attacking your devices and trying to figure out vulnerabilities, and the importance of collaboration is key. This slide here is extracted from, if you go back one more slide, sorry. This slide here is it's an extraction from the pre-market guidance that the FDA released several years ago. There are two sections within the guidance. One is identify and protect devices, and you see that on the left, and then on the right, it's about what manufacturers should do to detect, respond, and recover from cyber incidents. Now, for those of us in cyber, you look at the blue boxes below represent the security best practices that the FDA is encouraging manufacturers to use when manufacturing their devices. User authentication, multi-factor authentication, encryption, code signing, mutual authentication, whitelisting, key management, intrusion detection. We just talked about that. Secure boot, user alerts, software patches. None of these are really rocket science. I don't look at this and say, oh my gosh, they've reinvented the cyber world and they've recreated the cyber world to make it so much better. For those of us in cyber, these are really security best practices that should be implemented for any organization that is looking to secure their assets. So if we advance to the next slide, as we're talking about centralizing security solutions, I think this is really an interesting way to look at it. And you and I had a discussion about this, but You talked about getting the most out of the security solutions that you can. So finding a vendor or finding a partner or a solution that can help you address multiple security challenges. Well, now you're seeing on this, the light blue boxes are security best practices that leverage PKI or digital signatures. And so as you look at starting points and things that you can do, you can check a lot of boxes through proper use of certificates and signatures. And you can do a lot with that. And so, you know, I think this emphasizes why PKI was one of the starting points for you guys as you embarked on that road. But also the importance of trying to find those solutions and harmonize and find solutions that are going to allow you to accomplish more than just, you know, solving one vulnerability. Anything you'd add to this slide, Edison?
Just keep going back to it, right? Leveraging those common solutions. When we look at our R&D teams and our software developers, right? This is just a subset of the requirements that they have to manage, right? Because they have other requirements, whether they be customer requirements or user requirements, the system and hardware requirements, right? So making this as simple as possible makes it a lot easier for us to really implement and drive it forward. If you were to pick, you know, what would be maybe 8 different solutions to address those light blue boxes, right? There's a lot of cost and pushback from the R&D organization as well, even though they want to do the right things, right? It's just, we have to keep looking at this and simplifying it for our organizations. And so this just really highlights the benefit of, you know, again, our vendor partnerships and common solutions across.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. And, you know, as I mentioned previously also, cyber, there's no silver bullet. And I think the FDA did a good job of highlighting the different layers and levels of cyber that need to be addressed here. Everything from whitelisting to secure boot, having lockout policies for when a nurse walks away from a workstation. You know, it's a very thoughtful approach. The FDA pre-market guidance can be found. You can do a quick Google search and you can find the guidance language that the FDA has put out. It's still in draft form, but Edison, are you guys, I mean, talk to me about how you guys have implemented and are responding to what the FDA has done at BD.
So what we've done is created a framework, right, of how we look at security through the product life cycle and try to map our activities to that. I think we go back to, you know, those fundamentals. You know, we really use that to create our product security requirements, right? And so no matter what device we're assessing or what device we're manufacturing or creating, right, we really put it against those high-level design requirements and keeping a consistency even with the teams, right? So you're not going to get 300 different requirements for one device and 200 for another. You really are assessed against these really, you know, just common and we call them 33 high-level design requirements, right? And it's a lot of those things, but then mapping it to the life cycle is, you know, when do you do a risk assessment, right? Heck, you do it before you write that first line of code, right? Before you purchase or make that first technical decision, right? These are your requirements that you must also consider when developing this, right? So really getting in front of the organization around security has been really helpful. And then partnering them through, right? So you, again, go back to the hub and spoke model, right? Where you have centralized teams that help the product teams go through the risk assessment process, the penetration testing process, standardization of solutions like static code analysis and other things. And then, you know, enabling them to now understand where security is going to fit in their activities and their roadmap. So I think that's what I would like to add to the team here, because whether it's the FDA or, you know, the next industry, you know, kind of standardized approach of it, you still have to tailor it to your organization. You still have to understand your product development life cycle and map those activities to it.
Yeah, brilliant. Well said. All right, let's go back to the slides. So now moving forward, we're going to jump in quickly and talk about public key infrastructure. So go to the next slide. A lot of people, when we approach and start talking to them about PKI, they think about it as the technology. It's a certificate that gives them authentication and encryption. But PKI really is much more than that. It's a comprehensive framework that contains the policies, roles, procedures that are used and needed to do all the things you do with certificates: manage them, distribute them, create, store, revoke, all of that stuff. And public key infrastructure, when it's done right, is much more than just a fire drill. I need a certificate to authenticate this device. All right, we're done. It's more thought about from a global perspective. If you go to the next slide, you know, certificates are used, and we've talked about this for really three main causes: authentication of back-end systems that performs mutual authentication, making sure anything that's connecting into your device is trusted; encryption of data that's in transit, making sure that it's handled in a confidential way; and then integrity, making sure that the values that are being pushed from one device to a server or wherever it's going, that there's integrity. I like to share the personal story as a type 1 diabetic. I wear a continuous glucose monitor on me at all times, and every 5 minutes it gives me readings of what my sugar is. If those readings tell me that my blood sugar is 400 and my blood sugar is really 100 and I dose myself for that, the results can be catastrophic. And so the integrity of the data, knowing that it can be trusted. If you're a business and you're using sensors to gather data to make big business decisions, how do you know that there's integrity associated with that? And integrity with IoT is very critical. Integrity in any business, and knowing that the data you're looking at can be trusted is critical. And also not just integrity of the data, but also of how the device is operating, making sure that the configuration settings are in place and that they haven't been modified. The next slide, please. Edison talked about this a little bit, but public key infrastructure in an organization resides in a lot of different places, which is another one of the benefits of centralizing it. PKI is not just found with connected devices. They're enterprise use cases for things like email and Wi-Fi access and VPNs, and using certificates for good enterprise security practices. We've talked about IoT and the importance of using it to authenticate and encrypt data that's being generated by IoT. A lot of organizations leverage code signing, and that's another place where it can be leveraged in an organization. Document signing, and then of course your public-facing SSL and TLS certificates on a website. These are all the places where PKI touches an organization. And what BD has done, I commend them. They've looked to harmonize and leverage, as he said, purchasing power by bringing these practices together and harmonizing and having a platform that can address all of them. Next slide. Edison, I don't know if there's any comment. I know you had already spoken to that, but anything else you'd add to that?
Yeah, just keep kind of beating that drum, right? When we look at, you know, our software development teams, our R&D organizations, when you have something that's centralized like that, where, you know, regardless of where you are in the organization, you're using the same platforms and using the same things, I think lowers the complexity, right? Lowers, you know, the need for overhead, if you will, right? For to spinning up these solutions, right? At different business units or different product teams, it continues to shape that mentality where this is easier to do. So, you know, this is easier to implement and drives adoption a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. So key considerations of PKI, these are areas where we see organizations sometimes get into trouble when they're not practicing a thoughtful approach to doing this. The first two, certificate policy document and practice statement, I'll talk about that in a minute. That's one. Root hierarchies and how to structure that within an organization. And then, of course, having robust certificate management. We can go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about certificate policies. A lot of people, when they're approaching PKI, don't even know that certificate policy documents and practice statements exist. But a certificate policy document is really the governing, it's the rule of law for your PKI. It forces your organization to think through things like the architecture, the hierarchy, roles, who's going to be touching it, what are the uses of the certificate, how are you going to name and identify certificates. It addresses things like key generation and puts in place operational controls and technical controls that will protect your infrastructure once you get it stood up, and has you think through how you will approach and what are your policies for practices like revocation, and what the audit requirements are, and the frequency by which you're going to do those to make sure that your system still has integrity. A certificate policy document and practice statement document is very important for organizations because it helps them be thoughtful about standing it up and be strategic about the way they stand it up. If we could go to the next slide. Advance one more, please. One of the things you do in a certificate policy is figure out what your trusted root hierarchy is going to be. For those of you new to PKI, a root hierarchy is a root certificate is the topmost certificate in a chain of trust. This is really the reason PKI can be trusted, and it's such a viable solution. Anything underneath the root certificate will be signed by that trusted root. And if that signature is on a certificate, then you can know it can be trusted and that there has not been a compromise. Now, a hierarchy like you're seeing here on the right can look and feel a million different ways. And we see organizations structuring their hierarchies in a lot of ways to address business needs. For example, we work with a lot of large manufacturers who buy and sell businesses all the time. So in that scenario, if you're a large manufacturer and you have a root certificate embedded within a particular business unit and you sell it off, that could disrupt more businesses than just that one product. And so you want to think about how you're going to handle that. In situations like that, we typically see intermediate certificate authorities, or the intermediate, the middle level there, created for a particular business unit. And then from the intermediate, the end entity certificates are spun off. If a company decides to sell that business, that intermediate and the certificates chained to that can then be sent, and it doesn't disrupt other intermediates or other certificates that fall under a different intermediate. And so it's important to be thoughtful for organizations to be thoughtful in the way they structure their hierarchy and the way they go about this. Edison, I know you guys put a good deal of thought into your hierarchy. Any lessons you'd care to share with the audience today?
Yeah, definitely. Just like you just said, right? So VD is pretty large, and we do have businesses that we sometimes bring in, right? And so having that structure allows for a lot easier implementation, right? Both ways, if you're bringing in or taking out someone. I think this also helps really map out the complexity of the organization and determine which way we can use this root hierarchy to successfully implement certificate management. I mean, this has even been really helpful even for new product development as we think through all the different stages of a product, knowing how we're going to actually break this down, right? Really understanding that with the business unit, making sure that we can sustain it, right? Going back to some of the stuff that you were saying before too, right? It's this cost of ownership once you decide you're going to do something like this. It's definitely not something that you want to do internally, and try to manage at that scale and for the life of the product. And so, making sure that you understand all those aspects of, something like this is very important.
Yeah, that's great. All right, next slide. The last one is about device and certificate management. And, I think a handful of things are really important here. There was a great question earlier about having identity embedded in a device is critical, and having public key infrastructure can help you do that. A recent update to our IoT device manager actually at DigiCert gives us more capability around not just certificate management, but device management, and having credentials linked to devices and then having the ability to manage those devices. And so having that ability to have transparency and vision down to your devices and see what credentials have been deployed is critical. Having the ability to manage the certificate. So certificates can be burdensome, and automation is really important for things like expiring certificates and renewals. How are you going to handle and address those, and having a platform that allows you to do that? Provisioning flexibility, and there's really two types of provisioning here that I would tell people to be thoughtful of. One is about where your CA resides. Do you need an on-premise instance to sit on your premises, or do you have a tolerance for a cloud CA? And DigiCert, of course, we can support both. But you need to be thoughtful in how you do that and where you want your CA to reside. And then the other flexibility is about the type of certificate. Devices, every IoT device is just another unique IoT device that has complexity and challenges, and you need a platform that allows you to custom build a certificate that will match what the device needs. And so being able to provision certificates that can scale up or can scale down to meet the needs of your device. Going on to the next slide. Is a shameless plug for the IoT device manager. We're really proud of some of the enhancements that we have brought to the IoT device manager. Highly scalable platform, highly flexible. We can deploy on premise, in the cloud. We can also provision certificates to chipsets before it even gets to your manufacturing line. We have a high degree of flexibility. You need centralized control. As Edison points out, having the ability to have reporting and auditing of your practices in a centralized location for all of the ways in which your organization is using PKI. And then, of course, the end-to-end lifecycle management. In closing, before we, I know we have 10 minutes, so I'll be really quick here. If you go to the next slide, I think that this video depicts kind of the current state of a lot of manufacturers. And those of you who know me well and have seen me present, I use this a lot, but I think it's a very good depiction of a lot of manufacturers. They're coasting along casually. They feel comfortable, confident that, you know, they're pretty good on their bike or at what they're doing. And before he knows it, something malfunctions and he's face down in the pavement. If you go to the next slide, I had my own bike crash last year. I was riding with a group of friends down a hill at about 35 miles an hour, and something in the back of my back wheel malfunctioned and came up into my braking system and caused my bike to stop abruptly at 35, which caused me to launch over the front of my handlebars. As you can see here, it cracked my helmet right in half. 3 months before this incident, I was actually in a bike shop shopping for a new helmet, and there were two helmets. And they both looked identical. One of them was $300 approximately, and the other one was about $60. And I said to the sales guy, "What is the difference between these helmets? They look exactly the same. And which one should I get?" And if you go to the next slide, I thought his response was, first, a great sales approach, but also a really good lesson, and it does apply to cyber. He said, if you have a $300 head, get a $300 helmet. If you have a $60 head, get a $60 helmet. And I was like, all right, well, I guess you're just asking me to make a value statement here, but it was a great lesson for me. So if you go back one slide and look at the picture, the difference between a $60 helmet and a $300 helmet is the $300 helmet actually has carbon fiber woven through the foam of the helmet, which provides an added layer of protection. On the right side there, you can see a little sliver of yellow, and that's the carbon fiber that's actually embedded within the foam. The foam of my helmet was cracked right in half, and if that was the only thing protecting my head, I'm confident there would have been more damages. So to relate this to cyber, cyber incidents happen fast. The Wannacry virus spread to 70,000 devices in less than a day. I didn't have the time when I was going down to the pavement to go back to the bike shop, upgrade my helmet, and put it on my head. I had to act ahead to do the right thing to make sure that I had the protections in place. I would say that my head is considered a critical asset for me. If I break a finger or a leg, I can be okay, but if you damage your head, it's hard to recover from that. And so, the message to everybody today is do the right things up front. I think BD is a great example of getting ahead and doing the right things up front to make sure they know they have the right security protections in place. So when those cyber incidents happen, they don't have to panic and worry about running back to the bike shop. They can know that they have the right thing in place. And the other thing that I will add is it's not always about the cost. So the helmet, it was a cost factor, but it's really about the quality. It's about the quality of the solution, the thoughtfulness of the solution, making sure that you're doing the right things up front to know that the solutions you're putting in place are good. We'll pause there. Thank you everybody for joining, and we're gonna entertain some questions here. Let's see, Edison. I don't know if you've been monitoring any of these, but
yeah, I think there was one around balancing standard for PKI practices. I think that's a good one because I think that relates to even software updates and patches as well, right? When we look at medical devices. So I think the question was, Mike, what are your viewpoints on balancing standard PKI practices around certificate lifetimes for these types of devices versus typical IT best practices weighing security versus patient risk in the event of certificate expirations if a device does not connect to renew prior to cert expiration? Any differences in thoughts when it comes to easily replaceable devices versus ones that would require surgery to replace?
Yeah, that is such a good question, and it demonstrates the importance of being thoughtful in the way you're doing this, and having tools to allow you to, when you talk about certificate expiration. So in your certificate policy, you should think through those types of issues, and we are, that's part of how we make a business and how we run our business is helping our customers be thoughtful through those approaches. And I will tell you, there are things that you should be doing. If you'd like to dive deeper on that topic with me, considering the timing that we have, I would love to get on a call and discuss that with you, because there are some insights and strategies we would love to share with you. So please follow up with me by email.
Yeah, cool.
Any other, I think that I don't see any other questions. Edison, any other closing thoughts that you have before we conclude our webinar today?
No, not really. I think the only thing I would add right now is, continuing to work with, internal teams and your vendors and understanding your product life cycle. I think even to the last question, right? What's a critical device versus something that may not be as critical? It all starts, having those discussions early and often with your organization, with your cross-functional teams. I mentioned R&D a lot. But there's obviously a number of other folks within your organization you should be speaking with. Service organization, your product marketing organization, legal, quality, all of these folks will help you prepare better for cybersecurity and your products. Yeah.
All right, Edison, am I still? We just had our power went out at our office, and but it looks like I'm back on. It looks like I'm back on. That was a quick reboot. There it goes. There it goes again. Well, considering what's happening here at Digital right now, thank you to everybody for joining. We really appreciate it. Edison, you are a true champion and a legend. Appreciate all you do and the partnership that we have.
You brought the house down. You brought the entire building down.
It was such a great webinar that, funny things are happening. But really, Edison, we really appreciate your partnership. Thank you for taking the time to share these thoughtful lessons and the things that you guys have learned as you've gone down this road. And really appreciate everybody for joining. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to shoot either of us an email, and we'd love to get back with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. Likewise. Thank you, everyone.